Thank you for that extended introduction. Why was I called Buzzkill? Let me fix that screen. Hang on a second. Maybe now. Hang on. Does that work? No, you should be able to go there now. Yeah. So, I was labeled the Buzzkill of science on Jon Stewart, primarily because I sent out a set of tweets commenting on the physics inaccuracies of the film Gravity. And then people thought I hated the film when I was just pointing out some inaccuracies. One of which was, there's Sandra Bullock, a medical doctor, repairing our Hubble Space Telescope. No, you don't. Excuse me, we don't roll that way, right? Do you want me performing open heart surgery on you? I don't think so. So I had to clarify that little bit of the introduction. That's how that came up. It's great to be here, and as cliche as that sounds, I really mean it. I like looking for and finding places in the country and in the world where people care about what role science and technology plays, not only in their local economy, but in their future economy. It looks like this community gets it, so many places don't. So I urge you to never take this fact for granted, because so many places have no clue what it means. They think they can just waltz into the 21st century without any care or understanding of STEM fields. I was on my way here, I learned that NEXT is not an acronym. It's just somebody chose to use capital letters for no reason at all. And I thought so I invented an acronym for it, New Experiments in Technology. That's a first pass. Maybe we could do better than that. But some of what I'll be talking about today is derived from that book, and from that book. But most isn't. You know, I don't like talking about my books. I'd rather you just read the book and I could stay home. You see, that's why I write books, so I don't have to keep talking about that. But this is a special conference, and I've tuned messaging that otherwise appeared in that book to matter to this audience. And I want to lead off, as you know, I'm an astrophysicist, and I want to describe what role being on the frontier of space plays in the advance of science and technology. It plays a role you might not have thought of before. And so and before I begin, I want to start off with a set of embarrassing quotes. And these are quotes from people who should have known better, I think. And these are quotes related to our presence in, let's just start off here. Let's start. It is scarcely possible that the 20th century will witness improvements in transportation that will be as great as those were in the 19th century. The Brooklyn Daily Eagle, right at the dawn of the new century. So they were riding high on airships, dirigibles, blimps. The car, the internal combustion engine car, had just been developed by Carl Benz, and railroads were crossing the country. So they just could not have, they had no idea what was coming. And I'm just intrigued by this. The assumption that what you know of technology in your day is some kind of measure of all technology that might come afterwards. How short-sighted we can be. Here's another quote. Man will not fly for 50 years. That was Wilbur Wright to his brother Orville in 1901, right? Again, people who should know better. This is a New York Times editorial. We hope that Professor Langley will not put his substantial greatness as a scientist in further peril by continuing to waste his time and money involved in further airship experiments. These were now airships, the word airplane wasn't invented yet, and these are heavier than air ships that he's working on. Life is short. He's capable of services to humanity incomparably greater than can be expected to result from trying to fly. December 10th, 1903. What happened 1 week later? Do you know your history? 1 week later, December 17th, 1903, Wilbur and Orville fly successfully 1 week after this. No, it wasn't Langley, but still the idea that you're going to tell a scientist who's experimenting on the frontier that they're wasting their time is irresponsible. No, it is stupid and irresponsible. Again, these are just embarrassing quotes. People should have known better. No flying machine will ever fly from New York to Paris. That's Orville Wright, 1908. So at the time, people were thinking this new contraption is a toy, and it's just entertainment in the open field. Just to show that I'm not just blaming other professions, one of my own brethren, professional brethren from 80 years ago, there's no hope for the fanciful idea of reaching the moon because of the insurmountable barriers to escaping Earth's gravity. F.R. Moulton, 1932. The astronomer's telling you this. If an astronomer's telling you this, what hope is there for anybody to get this right? Time would continue. Landing and moving around on the moon offers so many serious problems for human beings, it may take science another 200 years to lick them. Science Digest, August 1948. No, it didn't take 200 more years. How many more years did it take? 20 years, thank you. 20. Once again, people were getting the wrong answer. Now here's what happens. There's an interesting transition from before Sputnik to after Sputnik. Because no one even imagines that this is possible, to go into space. And when you can't even imagine it, your most creative thoughts are rejecting the possibility. But then, once it's enabled, then it's as though we all passed through some kind of proscenium and emerged on the other side, and then our imagination went unconstrained in the other direction. Okay, this is the last gasp. Well, because when was Sputnik? October 1957. This is February. The very last gasp. Man will never reach the moon regardless of all future scientific advances. Okay? This is like the last time anyone said something this boneheaded. Sputnik goes up. NASA gets founded a year later. We announce the Apollo program. And so here we go. 1966. We're in space now. The space race is on. The most ambitious United States endeavor in the years ahead, the campaign to land men on Mars. Most experts estimate we can do that by 1985. So now people overestimate what we're going to accomplish. And there's a fundamental reason why that was the case. People looked at technology and just extrapolated and said, moon by 1969, because that was already in the cards. Moon by moon before the decade is out. And so Mars, give that another 15 years. Sure, why not? Because that's the natural thing when you're expanding on your capacity to travel, to explore space. What they got wrong is why we went to the moon. This doesn't factor in the motivating forces for it. And if you don't do that, you get the wrong answer, and you'll get the wrong answer every time. Every time. That book that I showed you at the beginning, it's called Space Chronicles, Facing the Ultimate Frontier. That's not the title I submitted it with to the publisher. The title I submitted it was Failure to Launch. Dreams and Delusions of Space Enthusiasts. And the publisher, no, that's too depressing. We can't do that. But he said, isn't there like a movie with that title, Failure? I said, of course there's a movie with that title, but we get to use the phrase literally instead of figuratively. They just couldn't relate. Let's keep going. A manned lunar base will be in existence by 1986, the futurist. By 1986, we had already stopped going to the moon for 14 years. The futurists, you think they should know better. By the year 2000, 50,000 people will be living and working in space. Rocket scientist Robert Trox, 1980. How many people were living and working in space in the year 2000? 3, thank you. Who said 3? Somebody? 3. Why did you know there was 3? You just know this? Yeah, it's just 3. he said there's just always only 3 people up there. So he said 3, not 50,000. So, he said it's a start. Yeah, really slow start, sir. So these are boneheaded statements that people have made. They underpredicted, then they overpredicted. Nobody ever got it correct. They're missing some information that we'll get to later. And what else do we also have faulty memory. We think of ourselves here in America as space pioneers. This is another delusion. We were not pioneers. We were reactionists. Russia were the pioneers. Practically everything we did in space was in response to what they either did in space or said they were going to do in space. I tweeted on 2011, April 12th, that's the 50th anniversary of Yuri Gagarin into orbit. There was pressure on me to tweet something, and I don't like being pressured because my tweets just kind of have to flow. And it was an anniversary, and I don't want to just say, oh, anniversary, because anybody can say that. I want to take you to a new place if I tweet anything. So I looked at this and I said, yeah, he's launched into orbit. He's the first human to ever go into orbit, but I'm not going to say that because everybody knows that. So this is what I tweeted. Okay? He's the 4th mammal species to achieve this feat. Okay? Just to put some of this space exploration in context. So here we are celebrating a human in orbit, but of course a dog beat him to it, right? Laika, the famous dog. Never a plan to bring Laika back alive, by the way. Laika died in space. And people say, oh, poor dog, and then the animal rights folks. I'm saying, look, Laika was a homeless street dog in Moscow and is now as famous as Lassie, all right? If I'm a dog, I want to die in space, all right? Okay. I'm going to pick my way to die. It's not starving in the street and freezing in the streets of Moscow. Followed by guinea pigs, mice, a Russian human, a chimpanzee, then John Glenn. Space pioneers, yeah. It's just delusional memory. What else did the Soviet Union do? So here's what they did first. They came up with the rocket formula. The formula tells you how much gas tank you have to have for the amount of payload you need to take, because there's no filling stations in space. And that's why the Saturn V rocket, all 34 stories of it, like 30 stories of the 34 stories were fuel. And way at the top would be the astronauts. Rocket formula. The Russians came up with that. They had the first satellite, the first animal, the first human, the first woman, first black person in space. It was a Cuban national. They were the first to land on the moon. Not with people, they had a robot. They had the first lunar rover, the first to photograph the far side of the moon, Earthrise from the moon. They landed on Venus, Mars, first spacewalk, space to spaceship, just first space station. So what did we do? We lost every one of these races, but then we got to the moon for say, we win. Because we defined it as who's going to get to the moon. It's a little delusional. So we have a couple of things. We had the first space docking, first humans to leave Earth orbit, low Earth orbit, first to land humans on the moon, first to cross the asteroid belt with a spacecraft, first to achieve hyperbolic velocity, the velocity to escape the solar system entirely. This is an impressive list, but if you talk about a race and checkpoints in that race, we were reactionary. We were not pioneers, we were, what's the opposite of pioneer? Followers. No, we were not proactive in our space activities. We were reactive. That's the pair of words I was looking for. Thank you. Thanks for trying to help me out here. Yeah. We also have faulty memory. Okay? So let's see how this memory plays out. So we've got, I'm not that interested in space. Well, who said that? Well, that was like John Kennedy to the head of NASA, James Webb, in 1962. John Kennedy was celebrating his 50th anniversary of his assassination this month in 3 days, and we think of him as, oh, he's the visionary politician and taking us into this. He was not interested in space. Just to make that clear. Space was an expedient pathway to gain international presence over the Soviet Union because we were obviously in an ideological as well as physical battles with them. What else do we have here? This is, whether we like it or not, a race. Everything we do in space ought to be tied to getting to the moon ahead of the Russians. Is there any talk about science, exploration, discovery in our DNA, what Americans do, what pioneers do? No. It is a blunt driver here. It's basically a war driver. That's why we didn't keep going to Mars. If you thought we went to the moon because it was the natural next thing to do, and then you're upset that we didn't land on Mars, no. Just read the history. Read the politics of it. Politics matters here. Military motives. Nobody wants to die. In fact, that's the greatest driver there ever was in the expenditure of cash or capital of any kind. I think militarization of space is inevitable. Not that I want that to be the case. I just read up on how human beings behave. That's not that hard to do. Open up any history book. Here's how it would happen. Okay? Access to limited resources or new high ground more often results in war and conflict than peace and cooperation. Am I wrong? Someone raise their hand and tell me I'm wrong. We're talking about our species here. Okay? Cislunar space is the new high ground. Cislunar, that's the new word of the decade. That's the space between us and the moon moon's orbit. So that entire area, that's cislunar space. That's the new high ground for the military. Defense of assets is a fundamental behavior of sovereign nations. That's just a fundamental fact. As space assets grow, military presence grows in tandem with it to protect those assets. And there's no obvious reason for me to think that turf wars in space will be politically different from turf wars on Earth. There are all these people who talk about the peaceful use of outer space. When we want peace in space. And I'm thinking, if you can be peaceful in space, why couldn't you be peaceful down here on Earth? If you can succeed at that, do it here. I don't understand. What? So the fact is you can't do it here. You haven't figured out how to do it here. It's not working here. Don't pretend it's going to work in space. That's just the blunt truth of this. I wish I didn't bring this news, but don't shoot the messenger. I'm only describing our species. Funding trends. Let's take a look at NASA. People say NASA needs more money and it needs it. Well, here's something interesting you don't hardly see. So this is a plot of NASA's 50 years run of funding in constant dollars. And it peaked as a percent of our federal budget back in 1966, just at the peak of the ramp up to send astronauts to the moon. It was already on the way down in the first lunar landing. So if you can't read that in the back row, I'm just saying, there's a hill there. You can see, obviously, we're on our way down, you get the lunar landing. If you take a running average of this plot, so it's sort of a 10-year running average, it comes to about $150 billion in a decade, about $15 billion per year. There's some fluctuations in there, but it averages out to about that. So the funding now, on average, is not different in actual spending power from what was going on in the 1960s. And so if you want NASA to do more, you either have to focus it, as we were focused in the 1960s, because we were going to the moon and doing not much else with that NASA money. You need to focus it, or increase the budget so that NASA could do everything. You can monitor Earth, you can advance frontiers in low Earth orbit, high Earth orbit, and backside of the moon, Lagrangian points, and Mars, and asteroids. Maybe you don't want that asteroid to hit us. Get somebody out there working on that. Top people, because we kind of don't want to go extinct, kind of, I think. As an asteroid, you know, if the dinosaurs had a space program, they would have used it, okay? I'm just saying. So right now, the federal budget has actually grown, so you can keep a constant percent of something and have your money go up if the total goes up. But right now, there's a huge difference between the nation's commitment to our presence in space and what it was back in the 1960s. It's an interesting fact. So here's my sort of biggest contribution, possibly in my life, to understanding this, what's going on here. I was invited to write a chapter for the Columbia History of the 20th Century. Back in 1999, everyone was trying to summarize the 20th century. Columbia University invited me to contribute a chapter in their book, The Columbia History of the 20th Century. And I wrote a chapter called Paths to Discovery. And in that, I was going to find all the ways that people had invested in great, expensive projects that led to discovery, do that historically, and then look at how that shaped out in the 20th century. Match up the causes and effects of what people did. And I expected to find hundreds of drivers for what led people to do great things. And I found only three. Only three. From the history of major funded projects, the number one driver is war. The I don't want to die driver. If you feel threatened, you will spend anything you have to not die. That's plain and simple. And so we can look at expensive things humans have done in the interest of war or defense. The Apollo Project. The Apollo Project. That was launched from the floor of Congress by John Kennedy, May 25th, 1961. Yuri Gagarin had just come out of orbit 6 weeks earlier. And what does Kennedy say? Well, that's when he says, we need to put a man on the moon and land him safely to Earth. You can hear his sort of New England accent even when you utter those words, because it resonates as one of the most important sentences ever uttered by our leaders. You say, yeah, there's a leader for you. Excuse me, back up 2 paragraphs earlier, this comes out of his mouth. Not directly referencing Yuri Gagarin, indirectly referencing him. If the events of recent weeks, he can't even utter the sentence, Russia beat us to space. He can't say that. If the events of recent weeks are any indication of the impact of this adventure on the minds of men everywhere, then we need to show the world the path to freedom over the path to tyranny. Then he says, let's go to the moon. That previous paragraph is the war driver. That's why we spent so much money to go to the moon. That's why we didn't put, it was a civilian agency, NASA, but we didn't put civilians in the capsules. Those are military people. Who are we kidding? The Manhattan Project, obviously, the creation of the bomb. The Wall of China, our interstate system. There's always money for roads here. Eisenhower, after his activity in the European theater of operations of the Second World War, saw the Autobahn in Germany. The Autobahn. It would rain, it would hail, and the road was still there. Tanks would go, the road was still there. Nothing washed out. Germany not only had invented the car, they invented the road on which the car would ride. Eisenhower said, I'm going to get me some of this. Comes back to the United States, puts in the interstate system as a defense project so that we can move material and personnel wherever we needed it. It also served the economy and trade, which will be the, this really should be 3, so sorry about that, but here's a second reason why people spent huge amounts of money, and it's praise of gods and kings. And we don't do much of that now. There's plenty of praise of gods and kings, but you're not devoting much resources to it compared to what was done back then. So back then, you'd get the pyramids is a huge tombstone for kings. Versailles is another example in Europe, the cathedral building, and you just look at what people did in praise of entities seen as more powerful than they are. We can't appeal to this today just because it's not happening today. Nobody does this. No one goes to Mars for God. All right? No, it's just not it's not. 3. Here's the economic return. So really, the second biggest driver is 3. I should have flipped this order. Sorry about that. And then you get the Columbus voyages. In New York City, they have the Columbus Day. Well, everybody's got a Columbus Day. In New York, there's a parade, and they end up at Columbus Circle, and there's a huge statue on a pedestal to Columbus, and all the Italians come out to celebrate this. And you know what I feel like doing? I feel like ascending that post with a megaphone and say, go home. They'll say, why? No, they'll say, what the fuck are you doing? You know, that's really what they would say. Pardon my, I'm just being realistic here. We have a few younger ears in the audience. Sorry about that. Say, go home. Why? Italy didn't pay for Columbus's voyages. Spain paid for the voyages. Columbus came to the Americas for the glory of Spain, not for Italy. Italy did not explore as a nation. That's why hardly anyone else in the world speaks Italian. Have you ever thought about this? Come up with a country other than Italy that speaks Italian. You can't. Unless you're really good at countries, right? Torcino. They speak Italian. Vatican City. But that really shouldn't count because it's in Italy, right? There's like 4 itty-bitty places that speak Italian. Who speaks Spanish? Everybody speaks Spanish. All of South America, practically. So you explore, you gain great economic return. The Columbus was not sent to discover science. He was not said, oh, bring us back the plants so we can show it to our botanists. That did happen. That's not why he went. It was, go to the New World. Oh, by the way, here's a satchel of flags of Spain. Wherever you go, put one down. That's what happened there. Here is a bust of Kennedy. I took the photo, and it's a sucky photo, sorry. But this is in Kennedy Space Center, Florida. You can't read it, but on the right, there's some etchings in the granite. That's the sentence, we will put a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth, from the speech that I described. And there's all this other room on the granite backdrop where they could have put that other paragraph. They could have even summarized it. Kill the commies, go to the moon, right? They could have put that in. It would have been a more honest portrayal of this moment. But we didn't. I just want to verify for you that the historically ineffective drivers, wonderment, the next frontier, destiny, new ocean, great nations, the calling, curiosity, the urge, these are, maybe the people doing it are driven by this, but the people who write the check are unmotivated by anything on this list. Journey, discovery, not even science at the highest levels of funding. That's just how it is. So I claim that, okay, I don't want to go into space for war. That's not a good driver. And like I said, nobody's going into space for God or for kings anymore. So what does that leave on that list? Money. We're a capitalist democracy. Let's just be honest about that. Money. So I thought this through. I think I got this one. Okay? But let's look at how you get to that point. How does space equal money? Well, yes, there's spin-offs, but you can do the math on the spin-offs. They don't equal the budget layout for NASA. $18 billion a year. Just doesn't equal. Doesn't come out. You can add up all the things, the Tempur-Pedic foam, the LASIK surgery enabled by safely and accurately by an algorithm developed to dock the space station with the space shuttle. And that way your eye can move, but the laser surgery moves with it. And that's a mutual docking conjoinment that happens there. Before that, there would be like occasional errors in your LASIK surgery. Now it's like you do it in an afternoon and you're back at work, later in the day. You can add it all up. The value, it doesn't equal it. So something else has to be happening. Before I get to the economy of it, let me talk about space as culture. Culture. By the way, is there a way to dim the lights so that these slides punch a little more? The light switches back there, I assume those control something. Yes, that's better. Yes. That's beautiful. Yeah. Okay, that's a little more intimate. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I so much would have preferred if this were dinner, because then there'd be wine and stuff on the table instead of coffee. Yeah. Space is culture. So, if you know your history, you'll recognize what's on the left. That's a V-2 rocket invented by Wernher von Braun in Nazi Germany, basically to terrorize London. It's the first intercontinental ballistic missile. It went out of Earth's atmosphere and came back in ballistically with enough kinetic energy that the kinetic energy of it falling out of the sky was greater than the explosive power of any warhead you could put in its nose. But they put a warhead in anyway. So, but modern-day ballistic missiles only have value if you put a nuclear warhead in it, because only then does it have more energy than the kinetic energy of the thing. And if it comes in and hits supersonically, if you're just walking around, you don't even know it's coming in. It's none of this. No. If you're going faster than sound, you don't even look up. And then all of a sudden, a building explodes in front of you. On the right is the Saturn V. The V-2 was invented in the 1940s, the Saturn V in the 1960s. In between these two periods, the only understanding we had of leaving Earth's atmosphere was the V-2 rocket. And everyone knew, even Wernher von Braun, that if we ever go into space, it's going to have to borrow from this plan. But in the absence of a Saturn V rocket, every science fiction person would represent their spaceship looking like a V-2. That's why all the science fiction films from the 1950s, they have huge fins, the rockets. Check it out. They all have huge fins. Not only did science fiction stories have huge fins in the 1950s, so did our cars. If you ask the designer, why do you have big fins on your car, they will not tell you it's because of the V2. They'll say, oh, it just feels right. It looks kind of cool. Do you realize when something is in your culture, typically you don't understand why you do it, you just do it. That's what it means to be your culture. It is invisible to you, but it's painfully obvious to anyone coming from the outside. This happened to me in Italy. I'm in Italy in the grocery store, and I walk by an aisle, and it's an entire aisle of pasta. And I say, wow, it's like fusilli number 8, pasta we never even see here. And so I said to the Italian, do you realize you have an entire aisle of pasta? They said, oh, that's just the pasta aisle. They're not thinking about it. Of course, they eat a lot of pasta in Italy. So I said, is there anything in America that you noticed in our grocery stores? And they said, oh yeah. I said, what? They said, you have a ready-to-eat breakfast cereal aisle. And I said, well, that's just the cereal aisle. Well, nobody else has that. Okay? Both sides of both aisles, floor to tippy-toe reach, are ready-to-eat breakfast cereals. We pioneered them. They surround us. We don't even know they're there. I said, anything else? Yes. The soda aisle. I said, that's just the soda aisle. Nobody else has a soda aisle. There's an aisle with a little part, and they got a few Coca-Colas and some sparkling waters. For us, it's the entire aisle, both sides, floor to ceiling. You don't notice your culture. It just is. But if you think hard about it, you can start tracing where they come from. Those fins ended after the Saturn V rocket was announced, because we didn't need big fins to navigate through the vacuum of space. Take a look at you can't see this in the back row. This is the percent of the federal budget given to R&D. Look how high it is in the 1960s. That's on the left side. And then it sort of flattens out, and it comes down to about 4%, but it was up over 10%. By the way, do you know that the national average for corporate R&D? We have some techie heads of folks. Can someone raise your hand? Just give me what is your R&D number for your company? Just bark it out. Anybody? 1%? Oh, 11. So you're up when we were in the 1960s. 11%. Any other numbers? See, now no one else. See, you ruined it for everyone. 4%, 6%, 11%. Just some other numbers? You're at 10%. Do I hear 9? So look at what we were back in the 1960s when we were going to the moon. Now we're down around 4%, and of course our economy is in the toilet right now. Well, let's take a look at the GDP per capita over these decades. I did that. All right? Here it goes. From 1950 to 1960, the GDP per capita rose 19%. From 1960 to 1970, that's the announcement of the Apollo project, the landing on the moon, the Life magazine articles about all of our astronauts, the World's Fair in New York, all about tomorrow, all the articles from old timers in here, remember back in the 60s? How long did you have to go? A week before there was an article in a major newspaper talking about the city of tomorrow, the home of tomorrow, transportation of tomorrow. Tomorrow was a daily thought. Mind you, that was in a decade that was still at the height of the civil rights movement. We had a Cold War with the Soviet Union and a hot war in Southeast Asia, and there was campus unrest. This country had problems like it had not seen since 100 years earlier in the Civil War. Yet we were going to the moon. Yes, militaristically driven, but it was working its way into our culture, affecting how we were thinking about tomorrow. And we knew as a culture there's only one kind of people who can make tomorrow come. And that's the scientist, the engineer, the technologist. We knew that. We understood that. What happens to the GDP per capita decades later? It drops to 23%, 26%, 24%, 7%. Guess what it is this decade? 0%. That's the change in the GDP per capita. It has been dropping ever since we stopped landing on the moon. Oh, you could say, well, that's kind of circumstantial. How do I know that one doesn't affect the other? Maybe it's something else. Okay, could be. But at what point does it walk and talk like a duck, or are you going to not say it's a duck? I've got more evidence here related to the cultural influence of that enterprise. So it's not just technology for money's sake, it's technology for what is your outlook. I want to make a connection between NASA and the environmental movement. Rachel Carson, sorry the text is a little small for you in the back row, wrote Silent Spring in 1962. It was a bestseller. Silent Spring was the first book to highlight the hazards of messing with your environment. In particular, the overuse of DDT as an insecticide and how that can trickle its way through other life forms in the environment and ultimately not be in our best long-term interest. If you speak to an environmentalist person, they will credit the publication of her book as the birth of the modern environmental movement. Well, I take issue with that. And I have actual data to show that her book had very little to do with the environmental movement. And that NASA had everything to do with the environmental movement. Everything. Because NASA had worked its way into our culture, our advancing a space frontier, and the technology that that required. So here's what happened. 1968, Apollo 8. A mostly forgotten mission, but that was the first time we ever went anywhere. Apollo 8 left Earth and went to the moon, orbited the moon and came back, and they took the picture of Earthrise over the lunar landscape. And there was Earth, not as drawn in your schoolroom globe with color-coded countries. It was Earth as intended to be viewed in space, as nature has it revealed to us. Oceans, land, clouds. We went to the moon and discovered Earth for the first time. Apollo 11, less than a year later. By the way, an FYI, Steve Jobs was 14, Bill Gates was 13, right at these events, as these events were unfolding. Do you realize representations of Earth before Apollo 8 hardly ever included clouds? We never showed Earth with an atmosphere. The atmosphere was, no one was thinking about it. Earth was the solid planet. No one was thinking about the interrelationship between the solid Earth, the life on the Earth, and the stability of the atmosphere around it. Here's Life magazine from 1960. Earth, there's not a single cloud. No one thought to include clouds. It's not that they actively said, I'm going to draw Earth and leave off the clouds. It was a non-thought. And it wasn't just, that's 1960s kind of early, let's go a little later. Let's go to 1967. Here's an episode of Star Trek, the original TV series that I just saw last night, and I got a screen capture this morning off my Netflix account, and here is Earth in the end credits and not a single cloud. What did that picture do from Apollo 8? It got us thinking about our atmosphere. It changed our relationship with Earth. Now let's go on down the list and see what happened after that photo was published. What happened? In 1970, there was a Comprehensive Clean Air Act. The first Earth Day, 1970. The first, that was a local Earth Day, National Earth Day, 1970. The Environmental Protection Agency is formed, signed into law by a Republican president, 1970. Why are we thinking about the environment? It's 1970 were the shootings in Kent State. We were still losing 100 servicemen a week in Southeast Asia. Yet we took time out from that to think about Earth. We were landing on the moon from 1969 through 1972. What happened? The Hellstrom Chronicle. It's a movie, it's a docudrama about insects taking over the world. That was a #1 movie at the time. Our environment was the main subject of that film. The organization Doctors Without Borders was founded. Where did they get that phrase from? If you ask them, they say, well, we just felt like we go from country to country. But without borders, excuse me, I submit that if they founded their organization before the Apollo 8 photo was published, they would have said international doctors or globe-trotting doctors, something. But without borders, that view did not exist in our culture until 1968, and I submit that that's what informed. No matter what they tell you, I'm claiming that it was in our culture. And like I said, when it's in your culture, you're not even thinking about it. It just gurgles up within you and you do it. DDT gets banned, 1972. You'd think Congress had other concerns. War, civil rights. DDT gets banned, 1972. This keeps going. Clean Water Act, 1972. The Whole Earth Catalog, Whole Earth, published. Apollo 17, the last mission to the moon. And we have a trickling of the consequences of this. The Endangered Species Act, 1973. The first catalytic converter. First unleaded emission standards, 1973. We're thinking about the atmosphere. You can do a Google search on the frequency of words published in a given year. That kind of tells you how much there's a buzz about one idea or another. All published literature. It's called an Ngram search on Google because they've digitized all books and all magazines and things. I did that. I did that for the word environment. So this is from 1800 to the year 2000. So the frequency of the word environment in published literature was very low back in the 1800s. And as we start coming into the 1900s, it begins to rise. Anyone who saw the Ken Burns film on what was it? The national parks and the creation of the national parks, people began thinking about the environment to preserve it, but not to. That's a different. It was like, okay, here's a spot I want to preserve it. No one was thinking that what you do here might affect an environment over there. The intersection of conduct and the destruction of environments was not yet on anybody's mind. So here's the rise of the national park, and it sort of flattens here. This is 1960, and this is 1970. And when did we land on the moon? 1969, and there is a spike, a huge spike in the usage of the word environment in the year that we went to the moon. I think we can zoom in a little bit on that. Oh, no, sorry. So here, I go back to that in a minute. The frequency of the use of the word pesticide. How about pesticide? So here we are. This is 1950, 55, 60. Rachel Carson's book is published in 1962. There's a little blip. DDT was a pesticide. It's not much happens. Here is 1969. 1968, 69, that's the rise, and it takes off. This is the consequence of discovery on our culture. What else do I have here? DDT. DDT was discovered, I think it was discovered in the early 1920s, but just as a chemical, its pesticidal properties were not understood or known. Those properties were discovered in the 1950s. So, of course, everyone is talking about it. Then it gets used, and it's cleaning up it gets rid of the insects. Everybody's cool with that, no reason to keep talking about it. Then Rachel Carson publishes her book. This is 1960, 65, so 62 is right. Here's Rachel Carson's book. Okay? She mentions DDT in her book. People talk about it briefly, and not very much. Here's 1969. It takes off once again. You can't overemphasize or overstate the fact that going to the moon made us recognize Earth for the first time. Here's environment, but on a much tighter scale, from 1900 rather than from 1800, from 1900 up to modern day, and that big spike on 2/3 of the way to the right is 1969. Now, about risk. Are we risk averse today? People like to say so, but I don't think so. Commercial aviation is very safe. This is the likelihood of dying every time you embark on that mode of transportation. So you had an 8% chance of dying from Apollo, 2% from the shuttle, automobile, and commercial aviation is extremely low. People are saying, well, today we're risk averse. No, we're not risk averse. If you're going to risk my life, do so for something that is really tasty on the other end. All right? Don't put my life at risk. I don't want to go into low Earth orbit and have a 2% chance I'm not coming back alive. That risk is too high for the return that you're offering me. What you're saying is, I can put you into orbit, boldly going where hundreds have gone before, and 1 out of 50 times you're not coming back. I'm sorry. I'm not going there. You want to send me to Mars? That's a whole other calculation. In fact, Mars won a project that wants to send people to Mars on a one-way trip. They said, who's with us? The line was around the block. They want this to be like the Mayflower, right? So, a vessel that takes you there, you live on Mars, that's your new colony. There's no end of people that would embrace this risk. Look at who signs up for it. It's huge. Let me skip over that. It takes too long for me to explain, and I'm going too long now. So, but the space community is actually relatively small, and it's viewed as a special interest group, which it shouldn't be, and I'll get to that in just a moment. But Boeing has, 150,000 employees. These are companies that are in the space world. They also build airplanes, of course. NASA has 20,000 employees. If you look at all these numbers, it's 0.23% of America. You can't get more special interest than that. But you compare that to other things, like the NRA has 4.3 million people. They don't keep accurate records, but Alcoholics Anonymous is nearly 2 million people. So in terms of who you are in the population, all I'm saying is your community of all the professional space people is 700,000, and there are many more of other kinds of people out there. The Royal Society for the Protection of Birds has more people than those who actually work in. Hannah Montana Fan Club, 1 million people. But look at this burgeoning of space industry right now. Every company here is a space interest group, either political activist space interest or a company. Because they see that space is the next place to do business. I've been talking about NASA up till now. It's got a $20 billion budget, but the total marketplace in space is $300 billion a year. That includes DirecTV, GPS, all the marketplace that serves GPS. It includes weather monitoring, all of this space activity, and these folks know it. And in there is a group called Planetary Resources. They're going to have the first trillionaires because they want to mine asteroids. Do you realize there are asteroids out there that have more gold on them that have ever been mined in the history of Earth? Just floating around in space, and they know this, and they understand this. Let's take a look at NASA versus commercial. That question always comes up. What role should commercial lead the way? They can't lead the way. It is not possible. And I'm the only one that's going to tell you that. Go to anybody else who talks about space, they'll say, commercial's going to lead the way. Forget government. Forget commercial. Even Newt Gingrich talked about, forget commercial leading the way. It's like, no. It's not that I don't want it to lead the way. It's not that I don't. It's just, look at how this works. Just look at how this plays out. Okay? The space frontier is expensive. The frontier I'm talking about is expensive, dangerous, and it has unquantified risks. Whenever all three of those exist under one umbrella, you cannot establish a capital market valuation for it. You can't. What am I going to say? Oh, who's going to invest in my trip? Well, what are the risks? I don't know. Will anyone die? Probably. How much is it? Really expensive. That's not how you get investors. So the history of this is that governments lead. The government has the long-term view. The government takes the risks. And then industry follows. That's how we roll as capitalists. Columbus was not a private enterprise. A country sent him. And what followed later? The Dutch East India Trading Company. The Hudson Bay, what do you call those folks? The Hudson people. There's the Hudson Trading Company. There's a counterpart to the Dutch East India. The railroads. This is where Newt got it wrong. He said the railroads didn't need the government. They just paved, the government acquired the land first. They sent Lewis and Clark, who mapped the mountains and the valleys and where the rivers were and where the hostiles and the friendlies were. Now, and the trade winds, right? So now I say, now, private enterprise, now you can quantify your risks. Have at it. Space shuttle cargo. We figured out how to do that. Now SpaceX is carrying cargo. That is not a space frontier. That is private enterprise taking over something routine where the risks have been identified. I see that relationship continuing forever into the future. But if you want to lead a frontier, you need the government to do that. That's my read of history. That's what enables you to go from a space program to a space industry to what is truly commercial space, where consumer money gets invested in it. I just have only a few more slides here to drive home this point. And the space frontier, if you're going to advance a space frontier, what does that require? You need astrophysicists, you need physicists, geologists, chemists, biologists, engineers of all stripes. That is STEM writ large as you advance a space frontier. Why do I want biologists? I may be looking for life on Mars. You find life on Mars, it'll transform life on Earth. All evidence shows. So these people say, I'm only care. Why are you spending money up there? Earth, we got them. That's like saying, why leave the cave at all? We have problems here in the cave. Don't go over the valley. We got to solve the cave problems first. How blind can you be to speak in this way? Yes, there are dangers out there. Some of the people who go to the valley and over the hill don't come back. But those that do have stories to tell. They have discoveries they've made. They found water supplies, medicines, herbal or otherwise. They found food supply. No, I want to stay in my cave because I have problems right here. That's what this is. So this is a STEM inspiration project writ large, without even having to call it that. And so I claim that if we have a total access to space, not just where do we go next. When we built the highway system, no one said, let's build it between New York and LA. No. You don't know how creative people will be later. You build that interstate system everywhere. Let other people figure out how to use it. And they sure did. So I claim that if we can go anywhere in space, low Earth orbit, that's a cool tourist. I'd save up money and go on a low Earth orbit jaunt. Mars is still a strong science target. Send science missions there. Cislunar is also science you can do there. Also tourism, military tourism. These are motivators. The moon, there's science, tourism, and military. What else we have? Asteroids, impact avoidance. Yeah, you don't want to go extinct, and you want to get rich. So you don't want to die, and you don't want to die poor. See, that's how that one works. Okay? On the libration points, we can do really cool science there. Just to remind you, the libration points are where all the forces of the centrifugal forces and gravitational forces cancel out. So there's a point in space where you're not falling towards any object. So you can build huge structures there that don't require structural integrity to stay up, because everything there is loosely floating. Here's the problem. These are my last 4 slides. Thanks for being patient. Typically, when we know of a problem, especially in Congress, they say, oh, let's solve it by throwing money at it. So we need better STEM in the country, so let's have better STEM teachers. So we have a teacher training program. Oh, we're done there. Okay. We need more innovation. So let's create an innovation program that helps people innovate. Oh, we got that. Okay. And then you put these Band-Aids on. And nowhere is that in your culture, is it? If you have to create a program to get you aware of something, or to get you interested in something, it is not in your culture. And when it's not in your culture, there are always forces opposing it. You want it as part of your culture. So I claim that those are Band-Aid solutions, and they may be necessary, but they're insufficient. The real solution, forget the abstractness of this, is you go into space in a big way, in all the ways that I described. You have to innovate to do everything that I showed there. Everything. You want to mine an asteroid, you got to figure out how to do that. It's not out of reach. We're not in a pre-Apollo era where we say this will never happen. We got this. We got this. So you innovate. Every next thing that happens in space ends up as a headline. Space Resources just found a platinum or a vein of platinum in a nearby asteroid. They're going to tow it into Earth orbit, mine it, and bring it down to Earth. That's a headline, because they figured out how to do it. How about you talk to the same mining asteroid and say, excuse me, the asteroid a little to your left we just discovered is headed towards Earth. Could you use your methods and tools to deflect it 7 inches over? Because 7 or 10 orbits later, it would have hit Earth, but you deflect it a little bit, then that a little bit of deflection accumulates, you save Earth. So we can tap the mining guys to save Earth. Just as Bruce Willis, he was a mining guy, and Armageddon. So it becomes headlines. When it's headlines, everybody talks about it. Today, people will blog about it. They'll blog about it. It's in the pipeline. The entire academic pipeline, it becomes relevant to what teachers teach. That creates more STEM professionals in the world. And in this, the 21st century, innovations in STEM fields are the engines of tomorrow's economy. There are no other engines. I don't care what people tell you. There's all the liberal arts folks who say, we want to put art in the STEM movement. No! No, they want to turn STEM into STEAM. Science, engineering, art. And no, they're missing the point. You don't grow economies with art. It doesn't happen that way. If you ever grew an economy with art, it's because science influenced how they did the art. We now have 3D movies done on computers. Science and STEM affected how movie makers make their films. We wouldn't have had the film Avatar, which is grossing more than $1 billion in the world, without the contributions of STEM. Yes, I like art as much as the next person. Just don't confuse the issue. We should do art because it's good for the full expression of what it is to be human. But don't tell yourself that you have to do that for the economy. Go to any performing arts center, there's a list of donors, all right? It's still a donation-driven enterprise, fine art, until the artist dies and then people collect it and they buy it at auction. Because they value your art more when you're dead than when you're alive. So, we go to space in a big way. It titillates the entire frontier of all the STEM fields. We put more STEM people into the population. They become tomorrow's innovators. And those innovators then drive tomorrow's economy. And this takes longer than an elevator ride to describe. the proverbial elevator ride that members of Congress require. And I'm saying, excuse me, if this is going to solve the nation's problems, I want more than your elevator ride. In fact, come to New York. Our elevator rides are longer because we have taller buildings than what you have in Washington. Then I can get this off. Tell me I only have 3 minutes of your time or 1 minute of your time. I don't play that. One last thing, personnel. America would be nowhere and we would be nothing without our foreign nationals who came. Here are two huge projects, the Manhattan Project and the Apollo Project. These are intellectual principles of the Manhattan Project. Everybody here contributed in some way to the Manhattan Project. And only 2 of them were born in the United States, and of them, only 1 of them got their PhD in the United States, and that was Arthur Compton. Yet it was America responsible for the Manhattan Project. How about the country responsible for landing men on the moon? America, the United States. But who led it? Captured German rocket pioneer Wernher von Braun. We didn't hang him at Nuremberg. No, we didn't. He invented the V-2. We capped him. We put him in Huntsville, Alabama, and said, take us to the moon. Wernher von Braun. We would have been nowhere without foreign nationals. We did not have the intellectual capital in our own population to accomplish our own goals. And I look around at the xenophobia that's going on now, where foreign nationals with huge talent want to come and participate in our economic opportunity, and we say, no, you're a foreigner. We're going to send you back the day after graduation. This is a map where countries are drawn with an area proportional to the area they would have on a globe, which means it's just a regular map. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is distort the area of each country in proportion to how much science, peer-reviewed science, is published. So if you don't publish much science, the area of your country shrinks. And if you publish a lot of science, the area of your country grows relative to other countries portrayed here. And just to get our bearings, they're color-coded by shades to indicate whole regions. So shades of blue, North America, South America, Sub-Saharan Africa, Japan, a lone sort of skinny blue patch over on the side. We have Europe, color-coded for former Eastern Bloc, and Western Europe, just so we can track where this goes. So let's see how much science is done in the world. One of the great tragedies of this map is that Africa practically disappears. One of the largest and resource-rich continents in the world practically disappears. Whoa! What was this? That was Japan. Take a look at Japan. We've got India, China. Look at Western Europe relative to Eastern Europe. There's no contest. This is the leftover fact that in Eastern Europe they did not have the economic resources to support the science that the rest of the world knew and loved. And the United States isn't fat and happy. So what's Tyson complaining about? Look at America there. Yeah, that's America. America. Yeah. You're looking pretty good, except this is the wrong plot. You don't look at how things are. You want to look at trend lines. What is the trend in publication of peer-reviewed research? What is the trend 10 years ago compared with today? That's the future. That's the future. Japan is even bigger. China finally showing up, which was already large in the last one. It's even larger here. Western Europe, even bigger. Western Europe has the largest particle accelerator in the world. They discovered the Higgs boson, the God particle. We didn't. We would have had that discovered in the early 1990s in a particle accelerator in Texas. But Congress said they cut the budget. Well, let's see why they cut the budget. So, watch. So they started saying we can't afford this particle accelerator. It's 1990. They run a report. The budget's fully cut. Early 90s. You say, what happened in 1989? Right at the base of those decisions, peace broke out in Europe. Whoa. The government had funded physics the entire century up until that point because they knew the physicist is commander of matter, motion, and energy. Three things you want to be total master of in warfare. If you're not at war, he said, okay, we don't need it. Never thinking that maybe you're advancing a technological frontier that can affect you economically, as what happened during the Apollo era. So the United States is fading and fading fast. This is Brazil rising up in South America. When I just say Brazil to you, what's the first thing you think of? Yeah, coffee. I'm a coffee addict right here. Coffee, right? Soccer, rainforests, scantily clad people on beaches. You have all these ideas, but you're not thinking that they have the third largest aerospace industry in the world. Most regional jets you ever step onto were designed, built, and manufactured in Brazil. But we're in kind of denial of that. Even the seat back pocket brochure on the airplane does not say made in Brazil. It doesn't carry that cachet in our minds. If it said German manufactured, hey, German, they're good engineers there. Yeah, we got this. Our own bias is preventing us from seeing what's happening in the rest of the world. So I submit to you that you are uniquely placed to tell the story of the value of science, technology, engineering, and math on the frontier of discovery and how that can affect our culture. Because when it affects your culture, you don't need programs to get people interested in STEM. Because they're already interested because it's in every day's headline. And they're seduced into it without a special government program to make it happen. Nobody needed a program to get people interested in science in 1968. People were climbing over each other to make that happen. So it's more than just whatever is your quarterly report or bottom line. It's how do we get this into our culture. From where I stand, big, huge government projects has huge ROI on that activity. That return on the investment affects not only our culture, but the economic stability of the nation going forward, and ultimately the world. By the way, this map is only science research, but it also tracks economies. The American economy is fading, Europe's is rising, Japan this has been stable, China is rising up. I didn't even plot money. This is science investment. Yet this is a chart of world health and wealth as well. What an indicator that is. Future's in your hands. Thank you for your attention. Thank you. Oh. Thank you. So where's NASA headed? My concern about NASA is everyone keeps thinking that they need a destination for everyone to rally around, as was the moon. But I claim that total access to space is what matters here. We should not think of it as a destination one-off project. The moon was a one-off project. We succeeded in going. The cat caught the bus after it was chasing it, and then what does the cat do with the bus at that point? There's no other plan in place. So if you develop a suite of launch vehicles, for example, that are tuned or can have strap-on boosters to go to one destination or another, depending on your need, then you can serve all of those interests, and all the while you will innovate. You will innovate in ways that can transform life on Earth. I'll give an example, a really simple example. If you go to cities where it rains with some frequency, and there's a turn on a highway exit, and you look at the road surface at that turn, it's actually grooved. It's grooved. Well, that improves traction on a turn, so you don't fly off the side. So that's a simple thing to put in. I wonder who came up with that, because long ago they were not there. It turns out it was NASA. NASA wanted to ensure that this glider coming in for a landing, called the space shuttle, which has no propulsion of its own, would not skid in ways unpredicted on that runway. So they did the research and found you just groove the pavement, it works for you. And you can say, well, you didn't need to spend $18 billion a year on a NASA budget to find that. Apparently we did, because no one else came up with it. That's my point. Your motivation, I could say, make this curve safer. And people come up with different guardrails and collision absorbers, but no one came up with grooves. But I really care about space shuttle. I care about space. I care about NASA. So if I'm tasked with making the space shuttle safe, I'm differently motivated than just trying to protect your Prius coming off the exit. And it's how differently motivated you are when you have huge projects that attract the best and the brightest in any community. And they come up with solutions, even those that are simple. So NASA, I think they need to think of all of space. And the country needs to recognize that that becomes an insurance policy against the failure of our 21st century economy. And if that doesn't happen, we might as well just move back into the cave. Space, been there, done that. It's time to explore other frontiers. So, in particular, medicine. And so, allow me to shed some light on that. If you walk into a hospital, a nice, large, busy hospital, and open up every door of every diagnostic lab, you'll see machines with on-off switches that are brought to bear in the service of diagnosing the condition of the human body without cutting you open. There's no end of such machines in a hospital, from x-rays, the whole radiology department, MRIs, the PET scans, all of this. Every single machine that a medical doctor uses that has an on-off switch is based on a principle of physics discovered by a physicist who had no interest in medicine at the time of the discovery. That was my whole point of the A, B, C, D. That is the economic driver. It's just not the Band-Aid economic driver. It's a deep cultural economic driver that requires the big mission. Everyone participates. It gets blogged about. Journalists write about it. Artists are influenced by it. They tell stories. They fictionalize space accounts. And it becomes car design starts getting influenced by some new spaceship that gets launched. And it becomes in our culture. And when it's in your culture, people do it without even having to be told to do so. So yes. Or I fantasize about this, going to China, going to the head of China, and I say, psst, I need you to leak a memo that says you want to put military bases on Mars, okay? Doesn't have to be true. Just leak it. And then I run back to the United States, oh, look what we found. If we found that memo, we'd be on Mars in 10 months with astronauts. What, 1 month to fund, design, and build the spacecraft, and 9 months to get there. I have no doubt that our military resolve won't do exactly what it needs to do to stay ahead of that. But, like I said, I'd rather it not be militaristically driven. The economic, as a capitalist democracy, economic drivers ought to be enough. It's been enough to do so much in the world before. So that's the explanation. It just doesn't fit in a single newspaper headline. You can't soundbite A going to D. You can soundbite A going to B. More science teachers. That works for a soundbite and a Band-Aid. First of all, a Virgin Galactic, last I looked, I think it's a suborbital loop. But even if it does go orbital, which won't be for a really long time, if that's their actual first goal, if you're going to send me into space and risk my life, I will do so only if I have a destination lined up. Like I said, I don't want to just boldly go where hundreds have gone before. I would welcome the zero-G experience, but you can do that on the Vomit Comet, you know, the plane that does the parabolic loops, without risking exiting the atmosphere to do so. People like going up above the atmosphere and you can see stars at night. Well, stars with the sun in the sky. I can wait till the sun sets to see stars on Earth, right? I'm cool with that. As an astrophysicist, I do that all the time. I think at $200,000 a ticket, I'm not lining up first. It doesn't offer me the return on my investment that I would seek. I walk in and I say, who wants to be an aerospace engineer? Because we want to design the first airfoil to navigate the rarefied air of Mars. I win. Who wants to be a biologist to discover the next cure for cancer? Noble cause, for sure. I walk in. Who wants to be a biologist because we're looking for alien life in the soils of Mars? I win again. I will win every single head-to-head exchange in front of a class of 8th graders. And I used to think I was biased. I'm not biased. I'm not. Who wants to be a biologist and go search the liquid oceans of Jupiter's moon Europa to see if alien life swims up to the camera lens? I win again. Okay? Okay. Who? And by the way, I'm not faking the appeal for the adversarial side here. Who wants to study the undersea ocean, go to the Marianas Trench, deep down, and try to find what might lurk there? Cool. Now, who wants to go to the bottom of Europa's ocean on Mars? Outside of Jupiter. I win there. Who wants to study Mount Etna, which may explode volcanically in the next 10 years? Maybe be able to predict its explosion. Okay? Who wants to come with me to Jupiter's moon Io, which has the most violent volcano in the solar system, spewing so much magma it repays the entire moon every 10 years? I win again. So my point is, if I want to attract people to STEM fields, the existence of these projects is its own force of nature. Otherwise, you have to stand there and tell them what your needs are and hope that they care enough about your needs to come to you and solve the problems with the resources you are allocating, because you think the resources you're allocating are what's going to actually solve the problem, when some of the greatest solutions to problems came about from some other place. Because not every creative person is in your field. I'll give another example. Let's say you're an expert in thermodynamics, the formation and transfer of heat. You're an expert. And I say, here's $1 billion. Invent me a better stove than this one that Ben Franklin is using. And you have unlimited money. So you say you'll make it more insulated, you might put temperature probes, you'll put timers, you'll recycle the heat, you'll come up with an awesome oven. You'll invent the convection oven, the surround oven. You would have never invented the microwave oven, because that comes from communications research in the production of microwaves. It doesn't come from your lab of thermodynamics. That's why all those fields need to be funded. And you could do that for free, sort of, by making space that frontier. Medicine is not the future without the machines they use. Now, how about neuroscience? I love me some neuroscience. I think neuroscience is to psychology what chemistry is to alchemy. Psychologists hate it when I say that. I think the day will come where our entire understanding of the mind will come about through the efforts of neuroscience. Go ahead. By the way, neuroscience is much cheaper than exploring space. So there's no reason why that shouldn't have all the money you could ever possibly want if we're getting money for space. But to say, how about neuroscience? I don't know that neuroscience is going to affect large industry. Look at what space affects. Telecommunications, mining, all these frontiers of science, geology, atmospherics. I don't yet know of a way neuroscience will affect atmospherics. So yes, it's a perfectly beautiful, burgeoning, blossoming field. But to say space or neuroscience, that's not even the right conversation to have. In a free society, someone ought to be able to do what they want. Look at the number of technologies that have to come together to make the iPhone. We have freaking satellites tracking where you are on Earth, telling you when to make a left turn. If you were tasked with only making a better telephone, would you have come up with that? I don't think so. So no, I don't walk around, I say space because it's all these fields, not space because it's astrophysics. I am excited by every frontier on which we are profoundly ignorant. I'm excited by the neuroscience frontier. I'm excited that we don't know what dark matter is, or dark energy, or how life arose from inanimate organic molecules. I'm excited by not knowing what was around before the Big Bang. I'm excited by wondering whether all our knowledge can be summed into one equation, as the string theorists seek. I'm excited to wonder whether there is life thriving in the oceans of Europa. I think not enough people are excited by ignorance. I think most people fear ignorance. They have to have an answer. This shows up in UFO reports. They see a light dancing in the sky. They don't know what it is. They call it a UFO because that's what the U stands for, unidentified. They say, I don't know what it is. It must be an intelligent alien visiting from outer space. No, you just said you don't know what it is. If you don't know what it is, it then must not be anything. Just live in the ignorance that something cool was happening. Await better data. The people that have to have an answer, they don't work on the frontier because they create answers that keep them emotionally satisfied. And by the way, the universe doesn't care rat's behind about your emotions. There's no end of people who assert the universe must be some way. And that bias influences their data taking, their interpretation. These are scientists that were ultimately shown to be not worthy of following their results. So I'm excited by all of that. And I like being alive at the time discoveries were made. I would have liked to have been alive in the 1920s, except for the part that people of my skin color weren't treated nicely back then. But holding that aside, I would like to have witnessed and been around and read the newspaper articles of Edwin Hubble discovering that we are just one of uncountable number of galaxies in the universe. To read the news, this happened in the 1920s, to read that the universe was in fact expanding. Expanding into what? That's a whole new question no one even knew to ask. Now that you know it's expanding, what's it expanding into? If it's expanding today, it meant it was smaller yesterday. How small has it ever been? Whole new sets of questions rise up. And in the 1920s, we discovered quantum physics. This obscure field where you study the behavior of the atom and the nucleus. Weird stuff scientists, physicists are doing on their tabletop. Why fund that? 60 years later, it would be the entire foundation of our information technology revolution. There is no IT without a mastery of quantum physics. By some estimates, it's 1/3 of the entire value of the world's economy is traceable to information technology, the creation, storage, and retrieval of information, enabled by quantum physics, discovered in the 1920s. I would have loved to have witnessed the unfolding of those discoveries. And perhaps we are on the doorstep of another set of discoveries, some of which may explain other questions that left unanswered. Those are the best kind.